Hey, it's Craig and Steven from the podcast Meet Me at the Table. Both Steven and I started this podcast to meet people where they are.
You're about to listen to this segment called Everyone Has a Story, where we hear from the many people that have been silenced from the church.
This segment is to continue to meet people where they are and give people the opportunity to speak about why they left the church.
We are here to listen and look forward to hearing your story. We'll see you there.
Hello, I'm Craig Seibert.
And I'm Steven Duenas.
And we're the hosts of Meet Me at the Table. It is a podcast focusing mainly on Christianity and how it's lost its personal connection to people. But we want to leave the table open to discuss other areas as well. We are going to tackle issues like women in leadership roles in church, acceptance of those in the LGBTQ plus community, or racial indifferences. And we set the table for all sides to be heard in a respectful manner.
Yes, and we are here for another episode of Everyone Has a Story. And today we are here with Betsy Gambrill. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to share. So I have been married for 25 years.
Congratulations.
And we have two young adult daughters. They're both students at Furman University here in South Carolina. And we homeschooled for 8 of those years.
Wow.
So we saw them through graduation and on to university, two daughters. But anyway, so I've been married for 25 years. Before that, I lived with my parents for 17 years, and we moved 19 times.
Wow.
My dad started with the Air Force and then works for the State Department as an Arabic linguist, which took us on a journey to some very interesting countries. And we lived everywhere from Saudi Arabia to the island of Crete and parts of Northern Africa. So that in itself became a very interesting story for me and my siblings to grow up in, because when we were not in a foreign country, either going to a church on an American base or a Catholic church run by priests in the heart of a African city.
Wow.
We were going to a very, very conservative Christian church in America. And it was back and forth. And the church that we went to was in Maryland, and where I was, kind of born and raised in that area. And I mean, we full blown had 100% polyester uniforms, red, white, and blue. Wow. I mean, that kind of thing. And then we'd be there for a year or two, and then we would travel to a country where I went to a school on an American base or an international school. So, I've kind of flopped back and forth in these different environments. And it was, to say the least, a very, very confusing and heavy childhood, and a challenge, a challenge to
it sounds like you saw probably a lot of denominations then as you were filtering through.
Right. So, I mean, like I said, a church that I really treasure, we went to for about a year, and it's probably the church that sticks out in the most in my mind. And it was actually I don't know what denomination, but it was run by priests in the heart of Tunis, Tunisia.
Wow.
And we would, park down there. We would go through these gates with these walls, and then it would be these gorgeous, lush kind of English gardens. And we would have church and functions with the people that would gather there. And then afterwards, we'd go to the officers club, for the American officers, and have a meal. So, yeah. So, I mean, and then I went to small churches on American bases. I don't really have too much recollection of what that was. I was a kid during those years.
Yeah.
And then we also lived in Saudi Arabia, which I have vivid memories of, where we would go to church, but it had to be hidden. We had no Bibles, and we would move from home to home so that they could never track us. And then we would go out every few months into the desert and camp for a long weekend with a very, very large amount of people from different countries that were believers, Christians, and we would have praise and worship and things like that because we could. There was no eyes to see what we were doing.
I
Wow.
mean, I think that's the beauty of foreign service, though, is, I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons of foreign
Mm-hmm.
service, and I work closely with foreign service officers, and there's beauty in that because you're able to see a array of perspectives in life.
Definitely.
You're not
Yes.
just centered in this, you know, as a lot of people, white evangelicals would say here, God's country. You get to actually
Yes.
see God in other countries,
Yes. It,
but
it
it has
was
its
much
cons.
yeah, it was much more enjoyable and enriching and easier to live in that atmosphere when we were in other countries.
Mhm.
It was when we came back to the United States and had to integrate back into the way of the American church, which was the very, very heavy transition in time for young people. I mean, I had a lot of freedom in foreign countries. And then I came back, and the church and the private school I went to, I had no freedoms.
Let,
And as a tween teenager, extremely difficult.
let me ask you a question. Was it harder to transition in the international school coming here to America, American schools, or was it harder for the church?
Well, it was harder for me to transition back into the church.
Hmm.
And the church was also where my school was.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
yeah, it was so that the two were
Yeah.
the school classes were in the basement of the
Mhm.
church.
Okay.
So I was there 5 days a week for school, Wednesday evening for church, and Sunday twice for church.
Interesting. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That is a lot of different areas to go through in your church life. And
Right.
it kind
It
of
was.
circumvents that second question that we usually ask of what's your church experience, because you've kind of went over that, but I want to narrow it down, and kind of transition into the third question. So what the most recent church you've been to? How long
Right.
were you going to that church?
Okay. Well, so that's a little bit of my backstory. I'd
Okay.
like to tell you also that I went from there to Liberty University.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
And
really?
yes. And my story there is very interesting because by the time I went there, I was very much ingrained into me because we had been in the United States for the last couple years of my high school experience, and it was very, very ingrained purity culture.
Mhm.
And if something were to happen, it would be my fault. And you
Yeah.
know, it had to do with how I dressed, how I looked, no makeup, you know, all of these different things. And so I was very, very well trained in that by the time I went to Liberty. And in my first semester at Liberty, I was raped by
Mm.
somebody that I had been assisting with his classwork.
Oh.
And I had never been trained in that area either. I had only ever told, so he drugged my drink at a fast food restaurant. And I had never told that anything that was a possibility. This is back in the 90s, you know, so I had never been told. I had only been told if I was the kind of girl to go to a wild party or to be alone with a boy with nobody else around, then I was asking for it at those times. I had absolutely no idea that at a fast food restaurant in the afternoon, the same thing could happen to me. So, that's kind of, so I went from, you know, this childhood of back and forth, then to Liberty with that happening to me in my first semester of my freshman year. And then all that Liberty,
Well,
That's all good.
real
all the
quick,
baggage that Liberty, and you know, there was good things about Liberty, good
so
things.
were you actually on campus?
No,
Okay.
he was a fellow student.
Okay.
We were off campus.
Okay. But you were actually, when you were actually attending on, because they do a lot of, my wife actually went there digitally where she didn't
Mhm.
actually have to be on campus, but you were actually
Well,
on
this-
campus.
Yes, I was
Okay.
I was a student there,
Gotcha.
and this was in the 90s.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they really weren't doing a lot online yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was a student there.
And not,
Yeah.
and you don't have to feel like you have to answer this question, but do you feel like Liberty handled it properly?
They never knew.
Oh,
So
okay.
I've only talked about that in the last few years because we were very well trained.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
That if
Keep your mouth
something
shut.
like that
Yeah.
happened to you, it would be your fault. I was
Yep.
trained at my own house that if I did something like that, which I didn't do it, you know, if
Yeah.
I crossed that line, which I didn't cross that line. I would have been kicked out of my own home. So I've been trained like that by my parents. At Liberty during that time, they had the building on the hill where the girls that got in trouble disappeared to, and we never heard from them again. So we had all of that at Liberty.
I mean, this
So
is the
no,
major
I never
issue.
told anybody. It would have been blamed on me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the major issue with purity culture,
Right.
completely, because it was
Right.
to silence the woman, and
Yes.
this is sickening. And I'm very sorry that you had to keep
That's
that
okay.
quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sad.
Yeah. It is very, very sad. And I know that it happened to many other young women during my time there.
Mm.
A few spoke about it and it didn't go well for them.
Wow.
So others of us that it did happen to, we kept quiet so that we could keep being a college student and we could actually earn our degrees and move on.
So you
Wow.
did finish out at Liberty then?
I did, yes. Well, actually, then my story takes another twist. It's very interesting.
Okay.
So I ended up getting married to my husband, who was not a student there, but we met and we got married, and I was 19. So I finished a 2-year degree there, and then we got married. And our intention had been that once he graduated from his school, I would go back to school. And then life happened, and I never went back.
Yeah.
Hey, I never went to school. I could never do it. Could
Yeah.
never do it.
I mean, yeah, it's not, life is good
Life is
regardless.
Then to circle that back, what is the last church that you went to then after
Okay.
after leaving Liberty?
Right. So then in the 25 years since we've been married,
Uh-huh.
and I married a PK. So, that is an interesting story as
No.
well.
Yeah.
But in the 25 years that we've been married, we have always gone to churches that were non-denominational,
Okay.
Okay.
probably driven by the fact that I went to Liberty and my
Yeah.
experiences there.
I could see
Yeah.
that.
So,
So what then made you leave? I mean, what was there a
okay,
single
so
decision, or was it something over time, or?
there was a lot of things over the years that my husband is incredible. He treats me as an equal. And it's very hard to find that at a church where they treat women as equals.
Yep.
And so that is something that has always burdened my husband. And then he is a father of daughters,
Oh, yeah.
incredible, powerful daughters.
Hits home
And
a lot
he
harder
never
that
wanted
way.
them
Yeah.
Yeah, he never wanted them to experience that. However, we did go to church up until 2019. And so we have not been to church since 2019, which we really have not wanted to go back with everything that has transpired in the American church in the last few years.
Yeah.
But the reason why we stopped going to church was we started homeschooling at the end of our girls' elementary experience. And our purpose in homeschooling was not for religious purposes. It was because we wanted them to be able to develop their own self-esteem, their purpose in life, and learn a love of education and lifelong learning. So that really was our purpose. Our intention had been to homeschool just for the middle school years and then send them back to high school. Well, I did such a good job of giving them freedom, letting them develop their own curriculum, going out in the world and experiencing different things, that they refused to go back for high school. So we ended up homeschooling for 8 years through graduation. And what happened was, the very first year that we homeschooled, we decided that we wanted to really change our lifestyle. We lived in upstate New York. It was very winter up there. And we started to homeschool. In fact, we were the only homeschool family in the district. They didn't know how to register us or anything. So we wanted to migrate to a warmer climate, change my husband's career a bit, and find a community of homeschool families, which, of course, it's prevalent to be Christians if you find homeschool families.
Yeah, we homeschooled my son for almost 4 years, and we found the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah. So we had a couple areas picked out in the South, and it just so happened that we moved to the Charleston, South Carolina area, which, God bless, we absolutely love it down here. We've been here for almost 10 years now, and it's just a wonderful place to live. we got involved in the homeschool community, which is quite prevalent here. The Christian homeschool organization that we joined was in need of some new leadership. And within a few months, they actually asked me if I would take over the helm of the leadership. So I did that. But over the course of almost 6 years, it led to weekly abuse towards me and towards my daughters.
Wow.
Just, hate mail, hate texts in the middle of the night, being ostracized from events, et cetera, et cetera. It was a very, very challenging time. We chose to continue and still work in that community. We saw great growth. We went from just over 100 families to almost 500.
Wow.
A negative bank account to a surplus in the accounting, and just really started to develop some wonderful programs. But in their words, it became too worldly. We became too accepting and too loving and caring towards the community.
So
I'm
you
sorry,
became-
hold on. The religious side of this said you were becoming
Yes.
too loving and caring.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just
Yes.
wanted to be clear on that.
Which we have seen in many churches. So this is where, what we have traveled through, my family has traveled through, is very interesting, because you ask me what was your last church you were at. That doesn't really matter, except for one little small part, and I'll tell you that in a moment. What matters was we were the leadership. I ran a whole board, of volunteers and everything, and we were the leadership of a community of Christians that came from all different sorts of denominations in our area. And so the problem is at every denomination.
Mhm.
The problem of self-focused, I am always right. The problem of not choosing to be loving as Jesus has shared with us that we should be.
Commanded.
This is, it's a problem. It's a sickness. And so what finally caused us to leave was they pulled me and my co-leader into a meeting, and they had complaints about us, that were unfounded. And so we ended up leaving the community, or not the community. We ended up leaving the leadership team.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then within a year, they removed us from membership and did not allow my daughter to continue to graduate with her friends. So, and there had not been anything that we were guilty of. The things that we were guilty of was somebody thought I was flippant with them one time.
You just weren't falling in line, basically, is what you were guilty of.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Nothing that would have warranted their behavior, but it just goes back to, we were being too loving and caring. And so what happened that we left our church was, we were at a very large church here in the area. We loved it. We're there since we moved here. But one day, in the height of all of this happening, I was on my way to the bathroom after service, and a woman that I had never seen before came up to me and put her finger in my face and said, "I know who you are. You don't deserve to be at this church."
Wow.
And proceeded to tell me things that were just made up about my amazing family.
Now is this is this a member of the church or somebody that actually works for the church?
I think a member.
Oh, okay.
Just a member, but I would, a member, homeschool family. I had never seen this woman, in my life.
Wow.
But gossip is a huge, huge issue as well in our churches. And so the gossip about myself and my family, was overwhelming. And I think that, since that has happened, so that was in 2019, I told my husband about it and he said, "That's it, we're done." So we have not been back to church since then. We've gone through, some very deep healing, and I'm so thankful for that. I'm
Yeah.
thankful for having a tight family. We're very close to each other, and but what I found is, as I talk to other women primarily, um, gossip is a huge part of the issue amongst, especially, and I say especially because this is, more my world, women in leadership, women in community with each other. Um, they're lying about each other, and it's coming from a place of pride and believing that they are the better Christian, and things like that. And that is absolutely nothing that Jesus has taught us or would desire in our lives.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like every time we do these type of episodes, it seems like the things that Jesus actually tells us to do, which is love, it seems like this is what the church is telling us not to do.
Right.
Which is
Right.
just, and it's confusing. And this, again, it's why we are seeing people leave the church. And then when you approach the church and say, hey, people are leaving you, well, it's because of you. No, no,
Yes.
church. You got to look at yourself in the mirror, and you need to listen to these conversations because it's so
Right.
important. The church is going to fail. It will fall if it does not start listening to its people. And
I
I mean,
agree.
your
I
story
agree.
here alone, the fact that you couldn't even speak about something that was so traumatic to you. I mean, there's so much toxic traits within the church. And if we
Hmm.
just continue to silence people,
Right.
what's the church going to look like? I mean, I think it was Naked Pastor who had a comic that had like the moment that someone entered into heaven, and he was like, "Wait, you're here? Wait, you're here? You're here?" I mean, I think that's one of the. It was a funny, like, just like a vision of what heaven's going to be like. Because if there is a heaven, that's what I do believe it's going to be like. We're going to be, wow, wait, I said that you weren't even going to make it in my own head, and it's just I don't
Yeah.
know.
And I think that's exactly right. We as humans have made all of these decisions about
Yeah,
others.
yeah,
And we have also made all of these decisions about what the Bible is telling us.
yes,
The Bible, while I do believe it is the word of God, it has been written by men
hmm
and tweaked here and there over history
A
by men.
lot.
yeah,
Yeah, just
Tweaked
a
a
little bit.
lot.
And
very much so.
so it does have fallacies. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does have faults. And we as humans most definitely do have faults, and we are not to judge
Yep.
who is going to be praising God eventually.
Yep. I
Yeah.
mean, if you go to Bible Gateway and just look at how many versions of the Bible there are
Right.
that have been twisted to be able to fit whatever,
Yes.
like, hey, I need a Bible for dummies. Well, here it is. Or I need a Bible that's more intellectual. I can't even say the word. There it is. I mean, there's so many versions of the Bible that have been twisted to be able to fit the narrative of what you want to hear and listen to and read.
Right.
But
Right.
well, I guess this leads us to number four. I mean, you've had a pack fill, Christian life. I mean, wow, it was a
Yeah, I've
lot,
had a very, very big variety of
very
experiences for sure.
unique. But what would it take for you to return to the church?
I was talking to my husband about that recently. We spent a lot of time sitting on our back patio. We call it the Lido deck, and we sip a drink and listen to some good music, and we talk about these things. And I told him I really do miss church. I
Yeah,
absolutely love working in a ministry. I love working with people, women especially. I think people are hurting so much. They need us to be willing to overcome our own hurts and work with them. And I feel like I'm about ready to do that again.
yeah.
So for a long time, he knew and I knew that I was not ready to be back in. I cannot go to a church and not be involved.
hmm
I cannot be around people
Yeah,
and not be involved
I know that
because I
feeling.
love them. Right. I
Yeah.
love them, and God has given me gifts that I, want
Mm,
to share and should
yeah.
share.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
right. So we have kept me out of that. Um, I think we're about ready. But then now, with everything that has transpired from 2019, when we
hmm
left church, to 2022,
A lot.
we look at the churches, and where is going to be accepting and affirming and inclusive and loving. And I never want to nitpick, every place you go is going to have shortcomings. I mean, that is okay. Um, but where can you find a place where you feel that you can really share the love of Jesus and be accepted for who you are
Hmm.
and not live in fear of some sort of made up discipline?
Yeah.
I think that in a nutshell is what it is. Where can you go back to a church where not only are others accepted and loved, but where you will be accepted and loved and not live in fear of repercussions of made up stories, gossip, etc.
And that's tough. I mean, even in the deconstructing community, which I know you're part of the deconstructing community, I've seen you on some of the
Yeah.
pages. Like
Uh-huh.
even in that community, we see even at least I see it. I see toxicness in there as well, where it's like
Oh, for
if
sure.
if you don't deconstruct the way I'm deconstructing, you're wrong. It's like, wait, I
Yes.
thought that this community was supposed to be, we have our own journeys. Like, so
Yes.
for you, I, I wish I could give you an answer of saying, well, if you go to this church, you won't get that. And unfortunately, it's sad. We all are supposed to be worshiping the same person, and there's so
Right.
many denominations as well. It's like, which denomination is going to be the best one that's going to be able to fit the needs that I need? And
For sure.
for
For
me right
sure.
now, it's virtual. But I like you, and I know Craig in our discussions has said the same thing. Like we miss the community.
Yeah, for me right now, it is working in my garden, spending time outdoors. I mean, you can meet Jesus wherever you are.
What are you growing? What are you growing in the garden?
Well, all kinds of things. I actually own a residential gardening company, so I visit
Wow,
over 20 homes a week,
that's awesome.
most weeks. But then in my own garden, I really am a hobbit at heart. So if you were to come to my garden, it would look like I should have a hobbit dome shaped little house and
And
come out in my bare feet because you never know what will be growing out there. So
Yeah,
I more grow for the bugs and the critters than anything else. But
yeah.
but you know, I made a big huge batch of pesto last weekend and picked some
Ooh,
flowers for the living room. So
that's awesome.
should have
Well,
eaten
that's
some.
about what I grow.
if you send us
Yeah.
that information, we'll include it in the description. I'm sure we can get some people to follow your journey on that one because
Okay.
that's awesome. Well, this
All
leads
right.
us to our last question, unless Craig has anything else to add.
No,
Craig, you have
I
anything?
don't. I mean, I lied. I do. I just want to echo that what you said, Stephen, about it's really hard to be away from it. It's really hard to be away from
Mhm.
being from feeling like you're with somebody who is looking at the
Yeah.
same goal as you.
Mhm.
And when you're
Mhm.
in church, even when you're serving, it you just get connected with people that really want to connect to God.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sometimes you start seeing the insides of things and you start seeing the bad parts of it because you're on the inside. And that's
Mhm.
where, for me, my journey kind of, I moved away from it. But you're right. I
Mhm.
really feel like I'm missing a part of me at this point. Not that I can't
Yeah,
Right.
worship, not
And
that I can't feel connected to God or Jesus
mhm.
at the times that I want to, but that I don't have that connection of group of people doing that at the same time.
Right.
So
Well, I
yeah,
mean, at the heart of it, we are a social creature
yeah,
and we thrive on connection.
yeah,
yeah,
But I always try to look at these seasons of life as just a season of life.
yeah.
yeah.
Eh,
It's not for the rest of our lives. You know, we're not going to be in these situations for the rest of our lives. And
yeah,
and Tim Whitaker, you brought him up. He's a good example for us.
yes.
Uh, I started following him on Instagram when he had, maybe 50 followers. I was one of the very first followers somehow. And just a heaviness and a sadness, of everything that he traveled through. And then a few months ago, I was blessed to be able to have breakfast with him
Wow.
and his wife. And the joy, still, he has a heaviness, but it's light.
Yeah,
He has
Yeah.
a heaviness because he has found his journey, his piece of Jesus,
yep,
his job on this earth. And through that, he has found lightness and joy
Yeah.
because he is creating community. He is reaching others. He is
yep,
giving encouragement and giving something back.
yep.
And I think that both of you are, as you continue this journey and you meet people, I mean, you're building a similar community path and new job for Jesus as you go as well.
Thank you.
And just remember that the missing the community is
Yeah,
just a season, but if you're given those gifts and those desires, then you are going to travel through that. It's going to look completely different, but it's going to be that much more amazing.
And that was beautiful. I mean, I think it's so important. I think one thing that the Christian community is really bad at, or at least that I learned, is not embracing the moments where you're at. I think this is when I'm deconstructing, it's important for me to focus on me. I feel too often we are told in the church, you have to put God first, God first, God first, that you forget to put yourself also first to be able to, I have to love myself. I can't love God if I don't love myself. So I think it's important to embrace the moments where you're at. And I think what you just said is important. It's to embrace where we're at right now, because it's not forever.
Yes. No, it's not forever.
Thank you for that.
And,
I really appreciate
and God is always there. Even if you choose, after you come through your deconstruction and you choose that you do not believe in God, God's still there.
Mhm.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So
I love that.
he's still there.
Oh, I love that. Well, let me ask you the last question. And again, like I said before we hit record, this is my favorite question because for each person, it's completely different. So, Betsy, if you could say one thing to the church, what would it be?
I think it would be, it's always hard to say things so clearly, but it would be to go back to perhaps one of my favorite stories, Jesus and the woman at the well. I always want to be the woman at the well. And look at somebody who has traveled through some difficult seasons. She's there doing the work that she was supposed to be doing. And Jesus came and he met her where she was. And he loved her and cared for her as if she was the most important person in the creation of humans.
Yep.
And I think that's, to me, where I always want to meet Jesus. I want to be the woman at the well, but I also want to be the Jesus that meets that woman at the well. And I think that that's what the church needs to be reminded of. Don't look at how someone is living, how they have lived in the past, how they are even going to choose to live in the future. Just love them as Jesus would love them and care for them and accept them.
Wow.
I think that's the biggest thing.
That was amazing. I love that. Well, Betsy, thank you so much for meeting us here at the table. I really appreciate your wisdom and everything that you said. This was beautiful. And I'm sorry that your story was silenced for so long, but I'm glad that you're able to start being able to express it. You deserve to be able to bring it up then, but I'm so glad that you're able to at least discuss it now. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I so appreciate the opportunity. It was really great to meet you guys.
You too. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you.